What's up, everybody? We are coming to you live. At least we're live right now as we're talking.
Yes.
If you're listening to this live, I'm kind of creeped out right now because that means you're somewhere lurking, either outside of where we are or you're in this room, and that creeps me out.
So either you work for the government or you're a serial killer. Either way, hello.
Hi. I guess. Don't hurt us.
What'd you think of our last podcast, I guess? I don't know.
Yeah.
Some feedback would be nice,
Yeah.
You're listening.
If you're the non-violent type, we'd love to have you come over and talk to us. But welcome to all of you, those listening right now live, those listening as we post this on our podcast channel. Glad you could join us. Today we are talking about some of our favorite movies of the early 2000s. You know, we're now getting closer to 2020 even. And so we decided we'd go back and talk about some hidden gems of the first decade of the 2000s. So these will be movies that'll fit between the year 2000 and the year 2010, which all of mine do, and I believe Dakota's do also. Which is good, since that was our criteria. And just kind of talk about ones that we think are a little, these maybe aren't the best of the decade. Some of them are pretty good that we have on our list. But just ones that we think we're far enough down the road where they've kind of gotten forgotten about, and they're worth a revisit for one reason or another. And so we're going to talk about that. And these are we're doing kind of just short lists. We're just going to give 3. And so this is something we could eventually visit again in the future and come up with 3 more.
Yeah, depending on how many of you like this and retweet it.
Yeah, exactly.
Or should I say share it? I don't know.
There's some obvious ones from the early 2000s that everybody remembers and will probably be remembered for quite a while. That's where ones like The Lord of the Rings fit in.
Batman Begins.
Yeah, Batman Begins. Even The Dark Knight would be in there in the beginning of the MCU.
Iron Man, yeah.
Even before the MCU and Batman, you have X-Men and X-Men 2. You have the Spider-Man franchise. So you have all these, there's all these big blockbusters that are in there. And this is when the comic book movie craze started first really taking off, was in this time. But each of us have movies that aren't in that realm, aren't in that comic book realm, not all of them are even blockbusters, but just really solid movies in there that deserve a first look or a second look if maybe you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that one. So up first for me, I'm gonna go ahead and start with a western, kind of a western movie that came out in 2003, I believe.
I have one question for you.
Yes.
Like the white boys say on the internet these days, what are those? What's a western?
What's a western? Hope you guys all know what a western is. A cowboy movie. One that actually takes place, though, in cowboy times. So this movie takes place in the 1800s, late 1800s, and is about a couple of cattle guys and their hired hands. And it's the movie Open Range. And it was a movie starring Kevin Costner and Robert Duvall. And it was directed by Kevin Costner also. He got back in the director's seat for this one. And it's just a really solid movie. It starts out as just like, I don't know what you call it, maybe like a traditional drama taking place in cowboy times, but then it just turns into a really good kind of cowboy gunfight part near the end. But what I like about this one is that it's not just over the top with its violence. It's not just shootouts the whole movie, and it's not crazy drunk cowboys or whatever, but it's just a really in some ways just straightforward story. And what it is it's about Robert Duvall is playing kind of this old ranch guy, and then he brings Kevin Costner on, and you're kind of getting this sense, and then you do find out that Kevin Costner's character used to be kind of an unsavory type, kind of a quick on the draw type guy, and now he's just kind of trying to live a little quieter, working for this guy. And then they have a couple other younger guys who work for them, but what happens is they're kind of guys who they're just moving their cattle across. That's why it's called open range. They're moving their cattle across the country and start running into problems with guys who are saying, hey, this is my land, get your cattle off of it. And this is kind of during that time when fences start going up a little more and guys are a little more tight about their land. But these guys were still in the right as far as the whole open range thing, but it causes this whole tiff thing and causes him to get involved in this whole drama that's going on in this one particular town. And because you have kind of a lot of elements going on. But what I find cool about this movie is that it just flows, and even though it is a little over 2 hours long, you don't feel it because it's kind of just a nice flowing movie that, like I said, ends with a really cool kind of classic Western feel. But the other thing I like about this movie is it feels really real. Like the town has crappy roads that get washed out by rain, and it just kind of has that real feel. And I just feel like this is where Kevin Costner shines, is just being that cowboy, and Robert Duvall too, for that matter. And then just a good cast around him. So I just really like that movie. And so Open Range is my first recommendation of good movie to revisit. So Dakota, what's your first movie you'd like to bring up?
Just this little gem from 2000 called Snatch.
Oh, okay. Coming right into the millennium.
Yeah.
All right. Snatch.
This movie, I think, probably out of all the movies out of the three I'm going to list, was probably the biggest marketed, and that was because it had essentially everybody who was hot in Hollywood at the time was in this. Benicio del Toro, Brad Pitt, Jason Statham, who was just kind of I think with this movie is when he finally kind of just his career took off. And it was marketed as kind of a crazy action Vinnie Jones was in this. Anyone who's seen Lock, Stock, and Smoking Barrels, that was the movie that made him pretty popular. But this movie is very, very, how should I say, awkward.
Okay.
Well, it covers the story of a guy who promotes boxing fights. That's who Jason Statham plays, and what they call gypsies, apparently in England, and who Brad Pitt plays. And apparently, he was so atrocious at doing a British accent that they came up with this language for him called Pikey, and if you hear him speak, you can't understand like a lick of sense that's coming out of his mouth. It's insane. I would not even dare try to imitate the accent he does in this movie. And apparently the reason he agreed to do this was just because he really wanted to work with the director of this movie, who was Guy Ritchie. He loved Guy Ritchie's work, and he's like, I got to work with this guy. And they found a way to fit him in. But yeah, kind of back to this whole movie being uneven. Dennis Farina is in this, kind of playing a mob guy from the States. Benicio del Toro is kind of playing one of his henchmen who gets involved with this Russian guy. Kind of gets set up, goes missing, and there's no way I could condense down the story of this movie. Just that it's a lot of very British people taking part in things that are illegal. And I hate to use common terminology or phrases when it comes to describing a movie, unless it's a swashbuckling good time. We all know I love that one. But this movie was just a roller coaster ride of stuff. It was violent. It was funny. It was kind of serious. And oddly enough, for a movie that's quote unquote violent, the most violent part of this movie is a boxing scene that involves Brad Pitt. And that's mostly why I remember this. I mean, it's more intense than anything you're ever going to see in Fight Club or anything outside of Bruce Lee movie. But I would definitely pick this up just because this film's very charming. I know I said it was awkward, but very charming.
Awkward and charming.
And Jason Statham, not very tough in this movie. He's kind of a bit of a pansy. But I just love listening to his commentary on things. Yeah, definitely worth checking this out. It was on Netflix for the longest time. I don't know if it still is. But if you can, go and watch it.
All right. So there's Dakota's first recommendation was Snatch. For my second one, I think I'm going to do one that's more of a guilty pleasure for me. I think once I say it, you're going to realize, yeah, it's not like a work of art or anything, but I think it's one that's really fun. And I think now that we're on this side of the reconnaissance, it just makes it even more of a movie worth revisiting when you see how crazy McConaughey is in this movie. Also, you get to see a Batman Begins Christian Bale just being really British. You hear his full, thick British accent in this movie. And I remember, like, when he first starts doing his narrating, when you get to his adult, like, I remember having to turn on subtitles the first few times I saw it, because I'm like, what is he even saying? It's like mumbly British. But it's the movie Reign of Fire. And what this is it's a movie where it's kind of I don't know if they really, it seems like they give a date at one point, but it's kind of, we'll just say like the little into the future, but not too far into the future, where what happens is kind of more in our time, some construction is being done in England ends up waking up dragons is basically what happens. And as time goes on, more and more dragons are appearing and are slowly burning away the earth and the people in the process, because they apparently eat ash. And so they're just kind of burning up things and feeding off of it. And so you're following Christian Bale's character. You see him as a child when the movie first starts, and then you see him as an adult then kind of helping run this place where they try to just keep people safe and try to grow food. And they have a lot of just orphans there. There's a lot of kids and teenagers there that they're caring for. And you also see an not early, I mean, he had been in a lot of, but like a pre-famous Gerard Butler's in this movie. And it's funny to see him in this too. But it's one of those movies where it's actually better than you think it's going to be. You're like, oh, God, some stupid dragon movie. And it kind of is. But at the same time, it's kind of good.
Kind of?
The special effects are pretty good in this movie. The dragons look great. And then there's just some like crazy action things, like ways they try to go after the dragons. Because what happens is how McConaughey comes this. It's Matthew McConaughey. He's a Texas drawl. He's not playing a British guy in this. He's an American group that comes in, and they kind of have this plan of how they think they can stop the dragons and hook up with Christian Bale's people. But you see just this like unhinged performance of Matthew McConaughey. He's got his head shaved, he's got tattoos, and he's just this like futuristic dragon slayer. And I don't know. There's just like, it's just kind of, if you're into this type of if you like kind of futuristic sci-fi stuff or dragon type stuff, this is one you should check out. It's just, it's just fun. It's fun. It's got cool action, and I like dragons. There's just not many dragon things, and I liked how they looked in this movie, and then there's just this ridiculously awesome scene with Matthew McConaughey near the end of the movie, with him in an axe and a dragon, and it's pretty glorious. And so my second one, even if I mean, I get it, it's a guilty pleasure, but I think a lot of you could find this movie pretty enjoyable. Reign of Fire, directed by Rob Bowman, who also I think did the X-Files movie. So that's my second recommendation.
You know, one thing I do remember about that movie, good Lord, this seems like a lifetime ago, but I think the problem with it was it only came out in like a limited run, and the critics just tore it apart. I remember.
Yeah, it was pretty torn apart. It was kind of an end of summer movie.
Ooh.
You know, like, I don't know, late July, or I don't remember exactly when it came out. But it was just kind of, it just kind of came out and then it was not. And, you know, like, it just wasn't really hyped.
Yeah.
And then when it was out, it wasn't like people were like just massively praising it. But then every once in a while, when I talk to someone who actually saw it, they're like, yeah, that's actually a pretty cool movie. You know, I mean, I think it just kind of just came out at the wrong time. But, and like I said, it's also interesting to see kind of Christian Bale then and Gerard Butler then in these roles and stuff. And of course, like I said, just Matthew McConaughey is totally, crazily, awesomely unhinged in this movie, which is pretty fun. So, but like, let's go on to your second one, Dakota. What do you got? Spit it out. Come on.
All right. Speaking of Christian Bale.
Oh, another Christian Bale. He's apparently going to come up a few times on.
At least a couple, I guess.
Yeah.
But this is another little gem from the year 2000.
Year 2000.
But anyway, I am going to talk about American Psycho, which, believe it or not, this is the movie that got him hired to play Batman. Yes, the movie where he played a deranged psychopath who may or may not be losing his grip on the world. His grip on the real world, I should say.
It actually takes place in the 80s, too, right?
Yeah, and oddly enough, a young Jared Leto is in this, and he looks the same as he does right now. And that just that always blows my mind when, like, a huge period of time. Christian Bale doesn't even look the same way he does. Nobody else in this movie does. Willem Dafoe maybe comes close. It's only
still scary.
Only because the guy's kept in crazy great shape. But Christian Bale plays this character. He's kind of a big deal on Wall Street. Chloe Sevigny is his secretary/assistant, and essentially he just goes around killing people, socializing with other people on Wall Street. And this movie is really small. It doesn't really have a lot of actors in it. But it's just kind of interesting because of Christian Bale. He gives a pretty realistic performance as a man who just does not know what the hell is going on. Which is crazy because, you know, in the movie he comes off as being like this this guy, just incredibly charming, smart, witty, and just in control of things. But by the end of the movie, it's kind of left hanging in the air, like, what's going on? And that's exactly what his facial expression kind of shows. And this is a really kind of bloody movie, and there's a couple scenes where you kind of have to either close your eyes or look away real quick because it gets really gruesome. But other than that, yeah, it's a very very enjoyable thrill ride, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of a study. It's basically just one man's descent into madness, right?
Yes.
And him seeing, how'd you put it? Him seeing that all the problems are around him and that he's not the problem.
Exactly.
He's basically, what's that word? Narcissist?
Yes, he is a...
That would maybe be the word?
Textbook narcissist, even though I've never read a textbook that delved into the tendencies of a narcissist.
So,
but I do know narcissist comes from Narcissus, I believe. You know what? I'm leaving it there, folks.
I'm literally watching him sweat bullets. His brain is starting to like wobble and jiggle as his head explodes.
You know what? All these ridiculous Greek myths all blend together at some point. It's hard to remember who slept with whose mom, okay? Or who fell in love with their sister or themselves.
There is a lot of crazy. You're right.
Or who killed a whatever and
who shot JR.
Yeah, who had the constellation. You know what, man?
Moving on.
Yes.
We'll come to my third choice, my third pick, and final pick for this episode.
Third time's a charm, Steven.
Third time. It's a little movie that came out in 2006. Starring Batman and Wolverine.
Oh, here he goes, people. I know where he's going.
They were both Batman and Wolverine at this point of making this movie also. Which is really what brought hype to this movie was that the guy who did Batman Begins brought together Batman and Wolverine into a movie. I am referring to The Prestige, which came out in October of 2006.
And it also starred Scarlett Johansson.
ScarJo was in this too, who would eventually become a superhero also. And Michael Caine was in this movie, but he's in a lot of Christopher Nolan movies since Batman Begins, or all of them since Batman Begins, except for maybe Dunkirk. I'm not sure if he's going to be in that.
I don't know if he is in Dunkirk.
But this movie is just possibly my favorite Christopher Nolan film. I just think this movie is just excellently done, and I just feel like the main two guys that you follow, which are Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman's characters, which interestingly enough, Christian Bale's character's name is Alfred, which I think is funny. But what they are is they're both magicians who, for a time, work together, but you could tell there's a kind of this rivalry between them where they're constantly trying to be the better magician, kind of one up each other. So it's kind of this back and forth one upping. It gets to this point where it becomes an obsession with them to make the trick that's untoppable, to figure out how to do the trick that's untoppable. And so each of them is always coming up with these new tricks, and each one is obsessively trying to figure out how the other did that trick and how they made it work. And they just become obsessed with this because they both kind of start, like I said, pretty kind of ragtag in these places where people just kind of almost like a vaudevillian version, and then they're both just, learning the ropes to get more acclaim. But where the term prestige comes into this is that you have the setup of your your trick. And then you kind of have the actual illusion you're going to do happen, but then the prestige comes when you have this moment at the end where everyone just kind of gasps with this kind of like, how did you do that? You know, and so that's kind of the thing. There's this obsession with them to find the greatest prestige moment. And it's hard to talk any more about this movie because it becomes kind of really an unraveling mystery where you just have to really watch it. And that's what's cool is that everything in the movie really ends up meaning something and playing on to the next things that happen. And I just think that Christian Bale, Hugh Jackman just give some of their best. For me, this was when I realized that how good Hugh Jackman really was, because at this point I'd really only known him for Kate and Leopold and Wolverine, which he's good in those, but this is where you really see that his kind of more acting chops of what he can do, and it was just really, really cool to see that. The other thing that's crazy about their names is that Christian Bale's name is Alfred Borden, and Hugh Jackman's name is Robert Angier. And so the initials are ABRA, Abra, for abracadabra.
Oh.
Christopher Nolan kind of is obsessed with little details in all his movies, and that was just something he threw in there. And so, but yeah, so this just ends up being like a really cool kind of psychological study, but then it's a mystery all wrapped into one, and it's really worth checking out. Even if someone has maybe kind of spoiled certain things for you, or you think this movie's been spoiled, it really hasn't, because it's still a really good journey movie to go through just their story of their rivalry, I guess, to put it.
Yeah, this movie has one heck of a twist at the end. One you do not see coming at all.
Yeah.
Like when I saw this, like I actually think I sucked all the air out of the room. Like, what?
Yeah, it's kind of what Christopher Nolan did. Was the movie was about two guys trying to have the greatest ta-da moment, when it becomes very meta, I guess you could say, because the movie's doing the same thing, where the movie has been the whole movie is really a magic trick.
Yeah.
And so you're watching those guys try to do it, and the movie also ends up being a magic trick where you have the prestige moment of the movie near the end too. And so it's kind of cool how it kind of plays on that. But again, you know, if you've seen his other movies like Inception, that's just kind of what he does. He kind of obsessively thinks about how to logistically play like in, you know, Inception, like dreams, and with Interstellar, just playing with the ideas of time travel and wormholes and how to there's just so many levels of thinking. But I just think this one is the most interesting and also the most entertaining, and so that's why it's just one of my favorites of his.
Personally, for me, the real magic in this movie was when David Bowie appeared.
Yeah, David Bowie
playing Tesla.
Yeah.
Nikola Tesla, people.
Yeah, he plays a real person in history. And they kind of bring him into the story, and they go to him to try to see if his technology could be used for their illusions. And yeah, so it's kind of interesting. And then also Nikola Tesla's assistant is played by Andy Serkis.
Yes.
He has a small role in this. So you see Andy Serkis playing just a normal human, not in mocap or anything.
Yeah, one of the few times that has happened, people.
Yeah. And so you get a little cameo from Andy Serkis doing this. So, but yeah, so The Prestige. But Dakota, what's your final recommendation?
Oh, I thought long and hard on this one, folks.
Okay.
Long and hard indeed. I was going to go with Dawn of the Dead, but I don't know. This other movie just won out over that other one. I'll come back to Dawn of the Dead, though. Still one of my favorites, but Definitely one from the early 2000s that for some reason, as the years go by, every now and then I'll just think of it and kind of get the urge to watch it. Is A History of Violence.
Oh, okay.
Which I think it's funny we start off this talking about when comic book movies started to go on the rise. This is actually adapted from a comic book graphic novel for, all you nerds out there.
Yeah.
But it's this is the one movie that I think I'm sorry, I almost called him Hugo Weaving for a second there.
Oh, Viggo Mortensen.
Viggo Mortensen. This is the one movie that Viggo Mortensen should be remembered for over Lord of the Rings, simply because this
What about Hidalgo?
Let's not talk about that movie.
You don't like Hidalgo?
No. Which is kind of sad because I wanted to love it. It just I couldn't do it. Anyway, this movie is about this guy who runs a diner in a small town. One day, these guys who essentially are just driving around the country, killing people, come into the diner, and they don't walk out. That then kickstarts this whole... He makes the national news after this. His character does. He attracts the attention of some not-so-nice people from Pennsylvania who have connections with the mob. Eventually, they show up and start making his life hell, and his family kind of starts to unravel, and his son starts to develop, who's essentially kind of a dweeb at the start of this movie, kind of takes on the school bully and beats him up pretty badly. And this whole movie, it's actually seems like a really short film, but it's not. I think it's at least 2 hours long, but it also stars William Hurt and
Ed Harris.
Ed Harris is in this too, sporting some pretty interesting makeup. I won't spoil the end for anyone just because the ending is actually pretty interesting, but yeah, if you like serious dramas, you aren't afraid of a little blood here and there. If you just want to,
this had an interesting director too, wasn't it? David Cronenberg.
Yeah,
directed
oddly enough, the guy known for horror movies directed this,
or weird sci-fi.
Yeah, really down to earth movie. That's the only complaint I have about it. It's a little too real. And some I mentioned Snatch earlier as being a really violent film. You actually don't see anybody die in that movie explicitly, but in this one, yes you do. So that's why I give the warning about if you're weary,
squeamish.
Yes, if you're not afraid to watch a little bloodshed, I would definitely give this a shot. And the horrible thing is, I don't really know if this has been on Netflix lately or Hulu.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time. I mean, I've seen this title come up on any of those type things. But I remember at the time, it seemed like it was fairly well received by critics, and
yeah, a couple people, I believe it received a couple Academy Award nominations, which is just odd. A film starring Viggo Mortensen, directed by David Cronenberg, adapted from a comic book. It's just, yeah, you wouldn't think it would.
And this was kind of the beginning of their Scorsese DiCaprio relationship too, because they've done a couple other movies together since.
I'm only familiar with one other one besides this one.
They did that Sigmund Freud movie.
Oh, yeah.
Dangerous Method or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
And then Eastern Promises.
Yeah, I only knew of Eastern Promises.
And I know they kind of have... Well, I think what happened is they just gained a friendship and just figure out ways to work together.
Yeah.
So... But yeah, this is kind of the beginning of their little thing too. Viggo Mortensen is an interesting character. He was kind of a last-minute bring-on to the Lord of the Rings movies, and then ended up becoming like a master swordsman very quickly.
Yeah.
But really where he seems to be most comfortable is in kind of lower independent movies. That's kind of what he mostly does. Because what happened after Lord of the Rings was he did try, or maybe was pressured into trying bigger things, like he did Hidalgo, which was a fairly decent success for Disney, and kind of did some other things. But it just seems like where he really ends up getting the most accolades is in kind of these kind of quieter roles. Like even most lately, he was in Captain Fantastic, which was a really critically acclaimed movie last year that was, getting some awards attention and things like that.
Yeah.
So it just seems like it's where he ends up being. I think he's just kind of one of those guys where, I don't know, he just likes to try more maybe the offbeat, interesting characters.
I think also what kind of plays into it is he became famous when he was older in life.
Yeah, he was already in his 40s. A lot of people don't realize that, but he was like in his 40s when he did Lord of the Rings, right? He had to have been. And so, I mean, because before that, I mean, he did he was in like A Perfect Murder and G.I. Jane, and he never really was anything that was where he was like a really big star.
Young Guns 2 is the only thing I can think of.
I remember the funniest thing was after Lord of the Rings, I rewatched the movie Witness, and all of a sudden I noticed that one of the background Amish people is Viggo Mortensen. Barely recognized him. He's such a young, fresh-faced Amish guy, but it was Viggo, and sure enough, that was like one of his early roles. But so yeah, I mean, like Dakota said, Witness was like in mid-80s movie.
Yeah,
he's been around a while. It's just like Dakota said, he's just one of the guys who really gained his biggest stardom when a lot of people are more just settled in, or maybe losing stardom in a way. So, but he's kind of one of those guys where because of Lord of the Rings, he's always going to be remembered to a certain degree.
Yeah,
because people loved Aragorn. And that was one of the favorite characters of that series was his portrayal of Aragorn, and he almost didn't do it. It almost went to a guy that nobody really likes, Stuart Townsend, which nobody really.
What are you talking about? I loved him in League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Yeah. He just isn't one of he's just not really talked about and hasn't really done anything real memorable, which is interesting. It's kind of like Wolverine. Yeah. Hugh Jackman was a last-minute replacement for, who was it, Doug Ray Scott?
Yeah.
Was supposed to be Wolverine, and so you just never know what's going to happen. You just never know what's going to happen. So,
Doug Ray Scott, and Stuart Townsend. Two of the most lifeless, uncharismatic actors I have ever watched on screen. Yeah, you can tell him I said it.
Well, there, you heard it from Dakota. As
Steven somehow tries to distance himself from me.
I'm not distancing. But I'm also not disagreeing. So, oh man. But yeah, so those are. So my three were The Prestige, Reign of Fire, and Open Range. So two of mine starred Christian Bale.
Yeah, how does that work, man?
Which is funny. And then a Kevin Costner movie, of all things. So,
one thing I didn't get to bring it up when you were talking about it. Was that the movie that it was kind of, people were saying it represented like the last of the Westerns, simply because Westerns are getting too expensive to film, some because locations are getting harder to find?
Well, I know that what he did with this movie was he had to go to Canada to find a place that would work for it. And then
you got to have actors who are capable of riding a horse, which...
it probably is tricky. I don't know. They just did that Magnificent Seven movie this past year, but I don't know how true to life that was. Because the thing with Open Range is it was filmed very, authentic. And so I didn't see that new Magnificent Seven. I didn't care. So I don't know how authentic that one was.
You didn't see it?
No. But you're right. I mean, I think there is something to be said for it. Is tricky. Because, when you're like doing a period piece where it's like old-timey London, they can just throw up a green screen and do some static digital image of old London in the background and throw in some steam or something. But it's probably tricky to do that when you're talking about just open countryside. I mean, you could still do it to a degree, but what's interesting is how you wouldn't think it would be hard to capture openness, but it probably is.
Yeah.
When you're talking about vastness, because everything is fenced in and there's towers everywhere, and I guess you can digitalize some of that out, maybe. But
yeah, the odd thing is, thanks to Westworld of all things, supposedly there's an interest now in more westerns. So it's odd. It's this. People said it was a dying genre. People also said that about sword and sandals movies, and it seems like every 20 years there's like a really good one. Then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, we need to start making these again. And
yeah, after Gladiator, we had a few that were kind of more in the lukewarm, like Troy and Kingdom of Heaven and things. But
yeah,
it's you're right. It's interesting, but yeah, I don't know. It's hard to know where those fit into that, but
I'm still waiting for the revival of the musicals.
I'm waiting for the revival of more dragon movies after Reign of Fire. That just never really took off. So
yeah, I want to see a Wicked.
I guess Desolation of Smaug.
I wanted to see Wicked. We could do Cats. I guess Cats will be okay.
Do you? Because I don't know if you remember your long list of why you hated Into the Woods.
That was.
So do you really want more musicals on the screen?
That was a very bad musical, sir. Thank you.
Oh boy.
Sorry, Anna Kendrick, but that movie sucked.
Musicals are tricky.
Yeah.
Only certain ones end up working on the big screen. So it's tricky. Tricky. We should do a musicals episode. That would be fun. Talk about some of our favorite musicals. So look for that in the future. But we're going to wrap up this episode. Dakota, what were your 3 movies?
I did Snatch, American Psycho, and A History of Violence.
So there you go. Those are some of our unsung, kind of forgotten movies of the early 2000s. So thanks for listening to this episode. We thank you for your listenership, if that's a word, for checking us out. So happy you're there. And keep checking us out. Spread the word. And if you haven't subscribed, if you are new or just haven't subscribed yet, please do that. That's awesome. We love that. It means a lot to us. And we also just do a lot of updates and news things on Facebook and Twitter. So we're in those places too. So we'll wrap this up. So this is Steven.
And this is Dakota.
Take it easy, everybody.